Um, and I'd like to thank you and Ranking Member Westerman for holding this important hearing today, and the witnesses for taking the time to testify. Ports are the economic drivers of our nation, and we certainly know that in my home in Houston. The Port of Houston just released new economic impact numbers reflecting the economic activity, jobs, and tax revenue provided by the more than 200 private and public facilities that comprise the Port of Houston. In 2018, the Port of Houston generated $801 billion in U.S. economic value, sustained 3.2 million jobs throughout the nation, and provided $38 billion in local, state, and federal tax revenue. The Port of Houston is the largest exporting region in the U.S. It's the largest U.S. oil exporting port, and is home to the largest petrochemical manufacturing complex in the nation. The port has been called irreplaceable because there are no alternatives to the pipeline, refining, and manufacturing facilities that exist along the Houston Ship Channel. It is a national asset, and it is critical that it is adequately maintained to ensure the safe and efficient movement of commerce for the benefit of the country. Each year, the Port of Houston generates $75 to $100 million in federal harbor maintenance trust revenue, yet it needs about $50 to $60 million to adequately maintain the Houston Ship Channel at its authorized depth and width. Its O&M dredging allocations in recent years have been $40 million or below. It's my understanding that the Port of Houston has calculated that the direct economic impact of the loss of 1 foot of draft on the Houston Ship Channel is $281 million. So I have a question for anyone on the panel who wants to answer whether they have performed similar calculations in their ports and have similar information about that impact.
Yes, Congresswoman. In recent years, we did an economic study. We had a third party do an economic study of our little port of Bandon. And that study resulted in the finding that our access to the sea that costs about $450,000 a year returns an economic output of between $52 and $62 million annually. That, in turn, results in a revenue to the Treasury, tax revenue, federal tax revenue to the Treasury of just under $5 million. So about a 10-to-1 ratio of return on investment. So even though the scale is quite different, I think that shows that small ports are a great investment for the federal government on those federal projects. And I'd like to also point out that $450,000 just addresses the federal channel, the responsibility of the federal government for their project. We also have other silt-in situations that we have to address on a regular basis that has to come from the local economy.
Thank you, Mr. Gaucher.
From
Yes,
our perspective
sure.
in Los Angeles, we anticipate the cargo volume will double over the next 15 years. So my work, whether it be on our so-called 2050 plan or some of the recommendations I've given to the subcommittee here today, are all with a line of sight on that area. And in very similar fashion, Roger Gunter, who runs your port, is a good friend of mine. And we talk a lot about these economic KPIs and where our drivers or levers can be. So I'm glad that you and Roger are keeping good tabs on what this means. Thank you.
Thank you. And with the few seconds I have left, maybe you can address this or anyone on the panel. How can we modernize the HMT so that ports like Houston that contribute more than they receive are maintained to their authorized depth?
That was the second point that I made in the recommendations to the subcommittee of a fair allocation, where no one is left behind. There is linkage to the full spend concept that we have, and even using banked monies if that is appropriate, and making sure that folks can grow their pot, whether they be emerging harbors, geographies, or other classifications of port outside donor.
Thank you so much, and I yield back my time.